Good evening and welcome to you all, both here and online. Um, I'm Daniel Keller. I am chair of the Audio Engineering Society Los Angeles section. And we are here this evening with the illustrious and indefatigable Will Kennedy and Matt Wallace, the award-winning ATMOS mixing team. You guys are actually award-winning, aren't you?
Yeah, no musical awards, but a lot of awards.
You got a bowling trophy, and we got a yeah.
Knitting, you know.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, well, they are award-winning of some sort or another, and we're here this evening to talk all about Atmos because we are in this lovely little setup here. We're going to talk about your setup in a moment, but give us a little bit of background here first on what you guys have been doing, because I know you've done a hell of a lot of remix work in particular.
Yeah. Yeah, we kind of were divided between catalog stuff and what's called frontline or new releases. So Will and I, the last 4 years, I think we're up to like 450 mixes about right now.
Roughly.
But who's counting?
Yeah, so we just, I mean,
We have a
kind of,
spreadsheet.
we kind of vacillate between those two things. And the thing about catalog, of course, we have to kind of match the vibe of the original as much as we can. The frontline stuff, we have a little bit more leeway, but not as much as what we'd like. But that's kind of what we've been doing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, more, I mean, at the beginning and when we started at the end of 2021,
Mhm.
it was definitely more catalog, and now it's maybe even tilted more towards new releases
Yeah.
than the catalog work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Hope you don't mind if I just jump in here for a quick second. I just have to say that Will and I could have done this, years before we jumped in. And I think neither one of us were particularly enamored with the technology. I heard it in the big Dolby Theater. It was like, okay, that's fine. And it folded down to a little Amazon device, and none of it really inspired me. And so we just kept working in stereo. But then one day, our friend Brad Wood, who's a producer, mixer, Atmos guy, who'd been bugging us for a while, invited us to his house, and we heard a Liz Phair song that we'd never heard before. And I remember Will and I walked out in the driveway, we're standing there like, did you like feel something there? And we found out that it was the emotional content.
Yeah.
Once the emotional content happened, then the technology was worth it. Because otherwise, technology for technology's sake doesn't do anything for me at all. I don't really care. But when we had like this feeling like, oh, okay, this actually can do something more than we expected. And that's when we both decided to build this whole thing and invest a bunch of money and time into it. And we basically eschewed we kind of gave up all stereo mixing, production, everything. We just feet first, we dove into Atmos, and that's what we've been doing for almost 4 years now.
Well, let's since you brought that up,
Yes.
let's dive into that a little bit, because that is one of the big contentious points about Atmos is, does it, and especially in your case because you're doing a lot of remixing of existing track. Let's talk a little bit about the vibe, because that is the emotional content here, and that is what has been, the big argument. Like, a lot of us have heard really shitty
Oh yeah.
Atmos remixes. Marvin
Sorry
Gaye
about
stuff
that.
comes
Yeah.
to mind. Yes. Well,
Yeah.
not your stuff, not yet anyway.
Yeah.
But like the Marvin Gaye stuff comes to mind,
Right.
How loyal can you be to the original
Well,
vibe on something?
I mean, here's the thing that I think Will and I've learned. You can tell me to shut up anytime you want.
Shut up.
The thing that we learned, because with Atmos, it does, of course, sonically sound different. But the thing that we learned the hard way, actually, initially with the B-52's Love Shack, is we first built the mix in stereo. We had to replicate it. Then we spread it out. It collapsed. It didn't sound very good. And then we kind of made it more front centric, and it started sounding pretty decent. We had some people come in who were fans of B-52s, and they're like, it's not, I don't feel it. It doesn't feel like the original stereo mix. We're like, what do you mean? Look how glorious this is. They go, no, it doesn't feel like the B-52s. And we learned a big lesson that no matter how many speakers we have, it has to have the same feeling of the original. Even though it's around you and above you, it has to feel, people have to get that same feeling they got the first time they listened to it. And we learned that lesson again and again. Honestly, sometimes to the detriment of the mixes, where we mixed some stuff that was mixed with cocaine and high end in the past. And we actually had this with one project, I'm not going to name it, where Will came in, he mixed it He said, check it out. I came and I listened to it. It sounded incredible. It sounded incredible. I switched over to the stereo. I was like, oh shit. So I walked into Will. He was in the lounge. I go, listen, Will, the mix sounds fantastic, but it doesn't sound like the original. So we had to pull out all this glorious low end he put in, put a bunch of high end in it, put some distortion, and obviously sound like a cocaine mix from like the 80s.
But that's what people loved about it.
That's
Yeah,
so
exactly.
we have to
That's
be
the vibe, right?
we have to be really careful. Anyway,
Yeah,
go ahead.
the B-52s thing, I mean, it was just such a, it was one of our earliest mixes, and it was, you know, so we get into doing this. We spent what, from August till I think it was October 28th. I think I've fixed that date in my memory, was when we first tried to mix something for real, where we had the room all tuned, everything was up and running. And so that's, and we started refitting the place in the beginning of September. We started planning in August. Yeah, we visited Brad in June, planning in August, building in September. So September and October, we're just refitting this place.
Yeah.
And we sit down, we start mixing, and we don't have any gigs at that point. Nobody's hired us to do anything. So we're just trying to stuff like out of Matt's catalog that we have access to tracks for. And that's a whole adventure we can maybe get into down the line. But pretty early on, the folks who hired us first were the folks at Warner, Rhino, their catalog division. And very quickly we got handed Love Shack. And I was terrified because I was like,
A lot going on that track too.
Well, no, it's not that much stuff, but what Will said, which
we're
is
we can't, I mean, excuse my French, but there was a point at which, because it took us 3 days to mix that thing. We mixed it
Literally.
probably 3 different ways, 3 different times. And
and
somewhere,
I'm like, Will, what's the deal, man? Why are you so worried about it? And you go,
somewhere in day 2, I looked at Matt and I said, Matt, we can't be the assholes who ruin Love Shack for the next generation. I can't sleep at night because I love this song. It's a great song. Millions of people, it's known all around the world. And we couldn't get it right. And a few things clicked for us. Some of them were having to do a deep dive into, you know, what they did. You know, they very sped the master. So we had to very speed our thing to match what they'd done. But then the other thing Matt was talking about was, at some point, is, you know, it feels like there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in that song. It's not as much as you think, number one. And number two, the B-52s were a band that, I mean, arguably at the height of their power, certainly their popularity for that record. Don is a really good producer. They knew what they were doing and they knew why they recorded everything. And there was a very specific purpose in stereo to everything that was being put there.
Yeah.
And what we were doing was tantamount to reaching into the middle of a well-crafted brick wall, yanking out the center brick and trying to put it over here, and then yanking out a lower left brick. Like we were thinking about, I think we weren't aware yet of what was appropriate musically to do with the format. And that was a big learning situation, was, oh, there are some things that have to live together for this to sound the way Love Shack is supposed to sound. There are some things we can spread out, and that's cool and that's fun, but we have to be really careful about keeping the stuff that belongs together in a way that's going to make people. We didn't get hired to do the Matt Wallace and Will Kennedy remix of Love Shack. Nobody was asking for that. They wanted it to feel the way the stereo version felt.
And by the way, taking this modern equipment and trying to replicate mixes that were done on analog. So we had to first build the stereo mix exactly. So you went back and forth, AB, yep, sounds like the stereo mix. Then, of course, we took it out too far. It collapsed. We put it back together.
Yeah.
And
I mean, for us, or for me, I was sitting in here one day working. This is, I want to say, like October of last year, and our friend Steve Genowick called, and he said, Will, can you send me the ADM file for Love Shack? And I was like, sure, what do you need it for? He's like, well, I'm sitting in an ATMOS studio with Don he hasn't heard it. He'd like to hear it. I'm like, oh God. So both terrified and really excited, I sent the ADM file to Steve, and 15 minutes later, the phone rang and it was Don. And he said, "You guys nailed this."
Oh,
Like
good.
I put it on, I hit plays like within the first 20 seconds, I knew you guys had it.
Yeah.
And that to me is okay, this is, if you pay really close attention to the intent of the artist and the intent of the production team, and try and be faithful to what they were doing in the first place, you can absolutely do this. It's just, it's not easy. I would argue it's harder than mixing something from scratch, because when you're mixing something for the first time, nobody's heard it before.
Yeah, you have
no
more
guardrails.
latitude in terms of what you do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when you're trying to mix something that somebody else has not only already done, but done in a way that became a hit and the
Memorable.
soundtrack to
Yeah.
generations of people's lives, that's a whole other kettle of fish.
Well, it's that old saying about, never let anybody else do your rough mix,
Yeah.
because then you're always going to be going for that rough mix, because
Yeah.
that's what people will hear.
Yeah. One of the things that's Will and I learned over the years, and that is, if you're trying to get into this to make any kind of money.
Wait a minute. What industry are we in here?
Okay, so here's the thing. I think for better or for worse, Will and I have always been dedicated to trying to get it right. And he, more than I, will go the last tiny distance to get it just right. And the thing of it is, we do really, really good work, but man, it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And we are not turn and burn guys. We've heard people, oh yeah, we mixed that album in 2 days. Like, oh my God, really?
How
the hell did you do that? So for us, we really are in it because we want to do great work, and unfortunately, financially, it's not been the best idea. But we love what we do, and we really stand behind the things we do. Anyway.
So I want to zoom out a little bit and just talk about the whole idea of Atmos, because there's a whole lot of misconception. There's a whole lot of, shall we say, bad mouthing and stuff like that. Because the questions are always, and it's the same questions, and I know you guys have heard these questions a million times. We all have had conversations about this. Why is Atmos different from the last 12 immersive attempts of 6.1, 8.6, 7.1, 5.1, etc. And the corollary to that being, why would I want to hear anything behind me?
Right.
Right.
I mean, the first thing is that Will and I have talked about this, with Quad and 5.1, none of that stuff was scalable for people who now you can fold it down to earbuds and headphones.
Yeah, you had to, with both Quad and 5.1, you had to own that many speakers,
right,
and listen to it on that system.
Yeah, and it was not portable. And nowadays we know people like music, it's really convenient. So you got your earbuds in, you walk around, you hear stuff. So that was the main thing. And I think the big thing about Atmos for me is that there's extended dynamic range. There's also extended frequency response. I will say this is the first thing in decades to bring back fidelity to music, because I think with the advent of CDs and MP3s and all this stuff, it's really been kind of diminishing, and it's convenient. But this stuff, I'm telling you, we've had people sit here. The guy from Rhino heard, we did a mix of Epic by Faith No More. And he goes, I've heard that song 300 times. I'm hearing stuff I've never heard before. We've had people hear songs they've never heard before. They feel emotional about it. They've never even heard it.
The other thing you get is height. That's one thing that I found that struck me more than, I haven't heard a lot of people comment on it, but the idea of being able to put something up there as opposed to,
it's the height thing to me was really interesting right from the beginning, because, and I think this ties into the, nobody wants to hear anything coming from behind them. Well, first of all, we walk around all day hearing sounds coming from behind us, and that's,
those are muggers.
Yeah. I'm not fine with that. But I've heard the argument, oh, people have a fear response to stuff coming from behind them. No, you don't.
Well, but let me ask you about that, though.
What's scary, and music isn't scary.
But let me ask you about that, because for the most part, I don't want to hear background vocals behind me, but I want to hear ambience behind me.
Are you sure?
Right? Well, I mean, maybe I do. I don't know, but
you don't. That's the thing, is all the people saying that tend to be people who haven't heard something that was mixed well that has a backing vocal behind them. It doesn't mean it's appropriate all the time. It doesn't mean that using every speaker is appropriate for every mix, but it doesn't mean that it's not in the correct circumstances. And people tend to, with both the heights, and this was a thing that I learned really early on, is I thought I had an idea about if I pan something above me, what that was going to sound like. I had an idea of if I pan something behind me, what it was going to sound like. And I was wrong on both counts. And as I've done more digging into the way we as human beings hear things and talk to people who studied this stuff, the thing is, we are not built to hear stuff up here with the same resolution that we hear stuff out here. We're built to be aware of stuff above us and behind us. But if we need to hear it well, what do? We turn around or we look up, right? So that's why what feels comfortable to us tends to be putting the important stuff in a mix between here and here.
Well, it's also matching with our visual.
Sure.
Yeah. And when you put stuff above you, I thought that there was going to be the sort of pinpoint precision to things in the top speakers. It doesn't work that way. And what I had to do for myself very quickly was pivot from what my expectation of how this worked was to what the reality was. And okay, if this is what is happening in reality, what's it useful for? What's it going to work for? And having to do a bunch of experimentation to figure out what worked for us in the mixes, in the rear speakers or in the height speakers.
To your point, Daniel, I understand that you're not keen on background vocals behind you. And I think that comes from the fact that in mono and stereo and seeing a band live, of course, everything is kind of front centric.
Yeah, I'm talking specifically about replicating a live situation.
Okay.
You know.
So, but I think that's a little bit, you're thinking inside a box of you're thinking of a live situation. What if instead of Daniel being here watching the band, what if you're sitting on stage with the band around you? What
Then
if
I'm
you're
in the
studio?
band.
What?
Then
No,
I'm
no,
in
no.
the band.
Well, no, you're not. No, I don't think you're in the band. I think you're a participant listening to the band. Just like when you see a band live and you're standing up on the side of the stage or something like that, or wherever it is, you can actually hear and take in the music in a different way. That is just not how we're used to. We're not used to that.
I did a talk for Dolby in Detroit for the auto manufacturers, where I played a few of our mixes and told some stories about stuff that we'd learned about the songs through working on them. And at the end of that, there was a little Q&A, and somebody raised his hand and said, he started the question with the phrase, "As we all know," and I knew I was in trouble. And he said, "The way we mix music is to be presented on a stage in front of you." And then his question continued on, and I said, I have to disagree with you, because what you're talking about, there are situations where we absolutely mix that way, but we've been creating virtual worlds of sound that have nothing to do with reality in musical mixes forever. Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band has nothing at all to do with reality.
Hendrix's guitar panning left and right.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're not imagining Hendrix running back and forth in front of you while he does that.
Oh, I don't know.
I suppose it depends on what you take.
Exactly. But well, I'm remembering, for example, I think it was Bob Margoliouth made a comment to me about trying background vocals behind them when they were in the early quad days. And his remark was that, people were getting nauseous.
Seriously.
Yeah. Now, I mean, again, it really depends what you're going for, obviously.
Absolutely.
But my assumption would have been that what I'm mainly using my rear channels for, my rear, I don't even want to call them channels, but wouldn't it be mostly to bring in room ambience as opposed to actually putting parts back there?
It depends. It's all material dependent.
Okay, which brings us to the
What
Well, I just think we sound like old guys talking about. But I mean,
today.
but I mean, that's like, you sit around the gramophone and listen to the thing. It's like, dude, this is a whole new world.
Mhm.
Just like when the Beatles went from mono to stereo, what did they do those stereo mixes? They put like drums and bass over here and guitar and voice over there. That made no sense.
That's true.
That made no sense.
Mhm.
But that said, the reason it makes no sense now, at the time, there were no rules. Nobody had done it before.
Mhm.
And and I'm sure somebody was like, they had 4 tracks to work with, right? So you're there with a knob that goes left, center, right, and you've got 4 things. And you've got a record label that if you put everything on C, where it probably sounds the best, because that's how they produced the whole record in the first place.
Right. Mhm.
The record label goes, what do we do in this stereo?
That's right. It's not stereo.
This doesn't wider. So then they just went left, right, print. And we're in a stage of experimenting right now where we have in stereo, we've got 60 plus years of runway behind us where we've made all these rules about how we record things and what things are pleasing to an audience and what aren't. But at some point, those rules didn't exist. Somebody tripped over what happens if we record that same part on the same instrument another time. What happens if we put one of them over here, one of them over here? Ooh, that's kind of cool. I wonder if people are going to dig that. Like, they didn't know the first time they did it.
Yeah.
And now we're experimenting with what happens if we put a backing vocal behind us. And on one song, we may go, doesn't make any sense. Musically, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, for ourselves, we did a mix of this band from England, a song called "Whole Lot of Love," and we
I think they're called Led Zeppelin.
That's right. And so when you listen to their mix, they have all this panning stuff. Obviously, like 3 or 4 of the guys are just panning stuff wildly in the stereo. And if they had a time machine and they could come to the future, I think they would have mixed it the way Will and I did, which is we meticulously listened to everything they did and we spread it out into Atmos. Because they did all this like rare, just like Hendrix. I think Hendrix would have loved Atmos.
Yeah,
no
He
doubt.
would have been like, oh my God, the guitar from behind me and going up over there? Absolutely. We're only limited by our imagination and our history with music. And if you want to get down to stereo mixes, those things, if you peel them apart, they sound terrible. Like if we had a band and we had acoustic guitar and a stereo mix with a bunch of rock guitars, and you solo that acoustic, what would it sound like? A tuned tambourine. No low end, just jing. But in the mix, it sounds like an acoustic guitar. But there's stuff that we brutalized in stereo to make everything fit in there. We had to jam and hammer things in. Now with Atmos, it's like, oh, everything breathes. Everything has a channel, dynamic range, full frequency. It's mind-boggling how much better it sounds. There are people that sit here and hear it for the first time, and they go, well, now you've ruined me because I will never go back to stereo again. If you have this option, you'll never go back.
Yeah, and that's been said. I've lost track of how many times by people.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, sit right here. People from record labels sit here. We were the first people for a lot of record labels that get their first experience and they go, oh my God, this is amazing, Anyway.
Well, but now that's a nice segue into something else that we were talking about, which is the whole idea of, and I know where you're going to go with this, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. Okay. For as long as we have been recording people,
yes,
for as long as we have been working in the studio, the reality of it is nobody ever hears it the way we hear it right now in the studio while we're mixing it. Right. I mean, even if it just comes down to like I've just recorded on, 2-inch 8-track.
Yeah.
Right. And I've got the kick drum and the bass from God,
right.
It's not going to translate that way when it's reduced down to an MP3, right? So again, same question here with Atmos.
Yeah, I'll take a step further. During during mixing in stereo in the olden days, if we mixed a song at Sound City and we mix it sound amazing, we can go to Oshaway and go, what the fuck?
Right, exactly.
I mean, the difference in rooms and who the hell was tuning that crap is ridiculous. If it was tuned. One of the nice things about Atmos is if people tune their rooms, Will and I did some mixes here and we weren't sure if our stuff sounded good. We went to Capitol Studio C, which is the that's the mothership of Atmos. and we figured out it's like $170,000 in speakers there. Our speakers are like $7,000 in speakers. We had our mix, we went there, push play, sound like our mix. It sounded like our mix. That's amazing. I've never heard that. I've been doing this for 42 years. I've never taken my mix from one studio to another studio and it goes, oh, there's my mix. That was the first time in 42 years that went from one studio to the next. It sounded like the same mix.
Yeah.
In 42 years.
Yeah. And
no exaggeration.
In terms of it'll never sound the way it does here, neither does stereo.
Well, and that was my point.
Yeah,
Is, you know, so well, I guess my question that I was sort of formulating all of that is, are we any better off with Atmos in terms of replicating the mix that we experienced in the studio versus a stereo mix? And I think you've answered that.
Well, I think with the earbuds, I think the earbuds, the binaural fold down is pretty good, especially on the Apple Maxes. Sounds really close. And cars, I'm telling you, cars, lights out. We've heard stuff in cars that is shockingly good. And I don't even like Cadillac cars, but that optic, that thing sounds so incredibly good. It's mind blowing.
Yeah.
It's mind blowing.
Yeah, I think translation is a forever problem. I don't think it ever goes away.
Yeah.
I think that the longer we work with this format, the closer we're going to get it. I mean, just the strides that Apple has made in improving their headphone playback in the last 4 years is amazing. When the first time we threw on a set of headphones and listened to Apple Spatial Audio, which if people don't know this, the way Atmos gets delivered on streaming services, Amazon and Tidal do it one way. Apple has decided to go their own way.
That was another question I had. Yeah.
And I think for Matt and I initially, we were like, the way Amazon and Tidal are doing it is just better. What we're doing bears very little relationship to what's happening on Apple Music. That is not the case now.
Yeah.
They have made huge strides forward. There are still things to be addressed for sure, but they're working on it. And that's a thing that you couldn't do with stereo, right?
Fair point.
And the thought, again, we just, it's all about looking at our history with stereo and how good we are at doing stereo, and then realizing that this just isn't to that point of development yet. But one of the things that's true about stereo is we draw a lot of equivalences in our listening. And one of them is the headphones and the speakers are the same thing. And they're not in Atmos.
They're not in stereo.
They're not in stereo
reality. I mean, come on.
But the assumption is they're really close, and they're actually not really close.
Yeah.
What we're dealing with now is essentially a different kind of different. And where before, whatever the differences were between the speakers and the headphones and stereo, they were always going to be there. Whereas with Atmos, these fold downs and codecs can actually be improved over time and have been improved over time. So we can push them further and further and get closer and closer to what we decide we like as a giant group of people, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the room that you mix in is really the gold standard. Like Bill's saying, we've heard improvements over time, and eventually it's just going to get so close that you're going to go, it sounds like the room, really. And it's getting there.
Or it just sounds good.
Yeah, it just sounds good.
I mean, I've kind of, for me personally, I've walked away from the idea that when I put on a set of headphones, what I'm trying to hear is this.
Yeah.
What I'm doing is putting on the headphones and saying, is this a cool experience?
Is this the room I want to be in?
Yeah,
basically.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Am I happy with how this sounds? And if I'm not, fine. Then I got to make a change.
The age-old argument has always been stereo is the concept of stereo is we have two ears.
Yeah.
So how do you respond to that since you obviously have gotten that?
I mean, that's a good question, but look, we have two ears, but we walk around in an environment that is not a stereo environment. Nothing in our real world is stereo, except for our hearing. You
Our
walk through
headphones.
town, you walk through a mall, you walk anywhere, this room, nothing is stereo, and it's never, symmetrical or anything like that. So it doesn't really matter. We got two ears, we hear ambient stuff, from back in the days when we were cave people, and we had to worry about jaguars and stuff like that. So yeah, and you can listen to music, you can listen to a cello, you can listen to a cheetah, whatever. So I think the stereo thing works fine. And by the way, even more than stereo, sitting here with the Atmos, you can actually hear and feel things around you. Like you've said,
Mhm.
the heights, you don't really hear the heights as much, and you don't really hear what's behind you as much, but man, can you feel it? Because when we have the switches, you can turn all those things off, like the heights and the back, and you're like, oh my God, what happened in the mix? And it's nothing you can
Yeah.
point to. You can't go, well, there's a sax up there and there's a violin back there. It's just this feeling that you're
Mhm.
in the music.
So is it more about the ambience, about creating that ambience, or is it? I mean,
I think it's like any mix. It's a combination of things.
mhm.
Here's the thing, we can't really rely on ambience because the problem is this. When you start adding ambience, the mix changes. If you add room to a mix that's already there that people have mixed dryly, or you add reverb to something, you're basically changing the mix. So we're trying not to add too much ambience unless we absolutely have to. Some bands are just like drums, bass, two guitars, and a vocal. It's like, well, we got to do something, so you're
Uh-huh.
going to add some ambience. But generally, we try to not to do that because it does change the mix. Look, if some of the stuff we mix that's dry and we put reverb on it, and the original guys are like, or gals are going to be like, yeah, we didn't want that. That's what we didn't want ambience. So it's really about placement. Placement's the important thing. You can take some room sounds. If they record room sounds, put them around you, put them on the sides. You can do all kinds of things, but try not to add it unless we have to.
And it has to feel good. That's to me, that's the ultimate thing is, and I'll spend a lot of time, especially at the beginning of a mix, kind of mapping out where I think things will work well based on the experience we've had from all the mixes we've done. Like, okay, well, this part would probably be cool if we do this. If I pan this thing here, I know it's not going to work in the headphones, so maybe that has to stay towards the front. Like, it's all of these calculations that are new based on working in this environment, and then experimenting and being open to the idea that even with that experience, this time it might be wrong.
And one of the nice things about ambience is back in the stereo era, you've got your sound and you got a stereo reverb. The thing that Will and I have been thrilled about is we have these Atmos reverbs. So you can have something happening here and you can hear the reflections, early reflections, and then you hear the ambience behind you. So we're trying not to add more reverb than they had in the original mix, but the reverb we are putting in place is in something that kind of wraps around you like you're actually in an environment. So I think that's kind of what you're talking about in terms of ambience. It is the digital room simulation, the digital, reverb. That is the kind of ambience that we swap in for what they had. We don't add it, we swap it in. We
Okay.
exchange it.
So a lot of the ambience that was added in the original mix, you are issuing completely.
Yeah, we are. We generally try to. Well, it really depends on the mix, but
Of
like
course.
stuff comes in with stems, they kind of print their own reverbs, and we have to go from there. But with multi-track stuff, yeah, if we can, we'll. In fact, we've done this with a lot of the stuff. We look at the track sheets and how they mix it. They go, well, they use an EMT plate. Okay, well, we got one of those. We have a Atmos EMT plate. Oh, you got this kind of reverb here. A 226 or a 480. Oh, we got that in the Atmos field.
Yeah.
And man, you sit here with that reverb. It sounds so good.
And we'll, or at least I will, it's usually me, I will spend a ludicrous amount of time A-Bing the reverb we want to use that's an immersive reverb against
the
stereo
original.
reverb.
Yes.
To make sure that the vibe's there.
Yes.
Because if it isn't, we can't do it.
Yes.
Because and I'm thinking of, we did the Romantics, Talking in Your Sleep, a mix that about 75% of which relies on the reverb.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's a very wet track.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
and it was brutal. that is, I think to this day, that's the one that's taken us the longest, and it was all chasing reverbs. Um, and there were points where I was like, I don't know if we can do this. Like
Can you ask the original people? Do you have access to
That was, yeah,
the
that's
original mixers of
in
that?
this
or
case, they're
producers?
dead.
oops.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it
Well,
kind of doesn't matter because it was 1983. And even if
Yeah.
they tell, and we had recall sheets,
Yeah.
we know what they did. It doesn't matter because
In terms of
it's-
like the type of reverb unit they used.
Yeah.
we knew
Yeah.
it was an EMT 250.
Oh, yeah, okay.
But
using just recreating through impulse response and just recreating your own version of it because you can't match.
We can't match it. No, we're not.
nor do you necessarily want to.
Just going for the feel of it.
We are because we don't have the analog gear. We're not, using discrete electronics. I mean, there's so much stuff that we're not using
even if
analog tape.
Even if we had an EMT 250, find me two EMT 250s that sound the same.
Yeah,
It's
there's
never
that.
gonna happen,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
we all
Yep.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah, at this point, it's
This is how it sounds today.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So
it was warmer
A
when
lot
I
of it's
printed
really,
it.
it's really detective work. Like Will said, he spends a lot of time trying to, build these reverb fields, and sometimes we're missing tracks. We mix stuff and we go, oh my God, this track's missing. We have to find them.
Mm.
We did a Fortner thing. We actually ended up getting, they were missing a really important keyboard track that we found a live version of it that wasn't played quite correctly in the right key, and we used that to put it in there
Oh,
because we
man.
couldn't have anybody replay it. They're like, no one can replay any instruments, so
Oh,
that's what we did. So it's a lot of detective work, and Will spent like a half a day getting the right speed on the B-52's Love Shack until we finally got the right, the feel of the whole thing was just like incremental. He'd move it this and that. He's got much more patience for detail than I do by far.
Yeah, but I mean, we're trying to get the sound to, we want you to A/B the two and not go, well, that's a completely different reverb.
mm.
Like that's the idea. Yeah, it is a completely different reverb, but if you really put your shoulder into it, you can get it close enough that unless somebody is looking to find a reason to not like it, they're gonna go, yeah, that's what I'm used to. Like that's what we want.
Yeah, it's just the
It's
feel.
it's
Mm.
never gonna be perfect, but can a fan of the song hit play, listen to it, and not trip over the fact
Yeah.
that this is
Completely different
not
mix.
Yeah.
the mix they're used to listening to.
Yeah.
How problematic is it for you if I mean, you mentioned getting a lot of older tracks. What if you have, reverb printed on the tracks or something like that?
And older stuff is,
Is it all dry? Or
of course. In the old days, you print everything dry unless you want to have a specific effect on something like a delay or something. But almost always the reverb was added in the mix. It was like a EMT or a plate or a room or.
Yeah, and it was
so you don't run into
on
that as an
this,
issue very often then, is what I'm asking.
more often on new stuff, believe it or
Yeah.
not.
Really?
Then yeah, we're much more often are
That's surprising
Are
since
we-
new stuff you've got, unlimited tracks. I mean, why
well,
would
yeah,
you-
except the way modern mixes are often done is instead of having a reverb return, people are just putting the reverb, say, on a lead vocal and then using a blend, a mix knob. So
okay,
then
yeah.
when it comes time to deliver the stem, they just print what they got. And there's nothing wrong. They're not doing anything wrong. They're just
Right.
doing it differently. But it can hamstring us in terms of what we can do to make the effect more immersive.
Mhm.
So it's often we will go back to folks and say, hey, can you reprint this with the reverb on its own separately from whatever be it an instrument or a vocal. But the old stuff is almost always dry.
It's almost always dry. I've never
Yeah.
heard of anything that's has any reverb printed with it on a track. Very, very rare, unless it's a specific effect on a guitar, like if you run it through like
Yeah, like
a
a
Fender
pedal.
Twin
Yeah.
or a pedal or something. But generally, I think you're always adding that stuff later on, really.
I mean, I'm thinking back to some of the older stems that I've heard, the old Queen tracks or something like that. I mean, a lot of that stuff, because they only had 16 or 24 tracks, they were printing a lot of
Yeah, and
effects with the tracks.
If you go back that far,
Yeah.
Huh.
I mean,
like
I don't know
the
if you've
Zeppelin,
been, yeah. I mean, have you been tasked with remixing any stuff that old?
I think the late 70s is about as far as we've gone.
Zeppelin? Yeah. I mean, Yeah.
Yeah, the Zeppelin stuff, the one we did was. yeah.
which hasn't, which
Were
isn't
those all
for-
dry tracks?
What's that?
No.
Were those were not all dry
8
tracks?
tracks, but
Yeah.
there was room ambience on the drums, but there was no printed reverb. I mixed in that old Queen stuff a while back, and I don't remember having printed with reverb at all.
The Zeppelin
Interesting.
stuff had, like, the vocal effects were all there.
Delay. There was
Yeah,
delay on
yeah.
it. There was delay on the guitar, but I don't remember any reverb. Maybe there's some the background vocal had
Yeah.
some effect like that, but generally, I felt it's always added later. I do want to say one thing that Will brought up some years ago when initially when stereo, we were comparing the stereo mix to our Atmos mix. Part of the problem was that the stereo mix was really substantially louder, and so of course you'd A B and you go, oh my God, the Atmos sounds terrible. But then with the advent of Soundcheck on Apple and Apple Music, it puts them equal, and it's really something when you A B between the stereo mix and the Atmos mix, just the sound and the size and the depth and the beauty in the Atmos mix, because it
The
has
quiet parts are actually quiet.
yeah, and but it's just gorgeous sounding, and you're like, is this the same mix? It's because we haven't brutalized the sound because we don't have to. We're also not allowed to. We can't hammer the mixes.
One of the earliest, it's not a problem anymore, but when we first started, there was no real way to do stereo bus compression or the equivalent of stereo
I
bus
was gonna
compression.
say you wouldn't do stereo anyway.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
and in Atmos.
Mhm.
So we all, a bunch of us came up with a bunch of very complicated workarounds to try and get that effect. And it was a real fear for me anyway, that, oh man, we're going to get these mixes in. They're going to have used all this bus compression. We're not going to be able to replicate that. Will we ever be able to make this sound right? And what I've found over time is the compression is not doing what we think it's doing. The vibe of, and the more modern we get, weirdly, the more what we're doing is distorting stuff.
Yes.
It's
Oof.
not compression,
Huh.
it's distortion.
Yeah.
And people are confusing one for the other. And what we're having to do is we'll get something to a stage where we're okay, let's throw some overall treatment on this. We'll go and do a little, because we're often trying to match, we're actually always trying to match stereo masters, not the final mixes. So we have to match the mastering EQ as well. So going and doing that, and okay, well, this sounds pretty compressed. I'm going to put a compressor on it. Whoa, that's wrong. And then I go and throw some kind of overdrive on it. Oh, that's what it is.
Yes.
So
And
your
what we're-
mixes are too clean, basically?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
yeah, and most of the time, not saying all the time, it's obviously some mixes that's an effect that people are using on purpose, and more power to them. But there's a lot of stuff where it's not intentional. It's what had to be done to make the thing as loud as it's demanded it be.
Ah.
And so now we have this mix that when you A/B the stereo to the Atmos, you're gonna like the Atmos better, but this is what they're used to. And much like you said earlier, you want to do your own rough mixes, they're not going to listen to our thing. They're going to listen to our thing against their thing and say it's not the same.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter which one's better. Like, that's the one we approved. Give us that. So we
Has to
gotta
match it.
add some edge into it. And sometimes it's cool, and sometimes it's, oh man, it was better before we did that, but this is what they're gonna.
Wow. That's like what I was telling you about earlier with the engineer that I worked with, and we used to put our mixes through
Right.
a couple of JC 120s and just bring it back into the mix just to dirty it up a little bit,
And all of this, like, none of this is to say that the people are out there doing bad work. They're doing what they're called on to do.
And also that was a different time, so that we're talking different technology in terms of what they use.
Well, I'm talking about new release stuff.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or remasters of old stuff. Like if we're matching, like, say a remaster of a catalog thing from 2 years ago, mastering engineer probably leaned way into it because they wanted the new master to be louder than the old master.
Yeah, a lot of modern stuff
Okay,
is like
sure. Loudness wars.
Yeah.
it's all -6 and -7. That stuff is just hammered. I mean, it's like brick wall. It's just hammered. It's it's not particularly pleasant sounding. It's very loud, but not pleasant.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yikes. Um, well, I mean, I've covered most of my questions. Do we have questions from
From the audience?
folks here? From the audience? Yes.
So many questions.
Oh, man.
First of all, can you start at the beginning?
Yes.
What is ATMOS? I mean, how many channels, and is it always the same? And does this control room?
Do you want
need
me to-
be-
Yeah,
need to
you-
be
Okay.
ATMOS
Oh, yeah,
certified,
okay.
ATMOS
You
certified?
tell us.
Okay, so let's go to the very basic stuff. So apologies to people who know this stuff already. No, it's fine.
I don't.
No.
So-
I actually should have opened with that. So, you
The
know,
essential difference between Atmos and what you would have referred to as surround sound 517191 is that everything up until Atmos and any immersive thing that we're talking about, Sony 360, whatever Google and Samsung's new thing is, was what you'd refer to as channel based, right? So there's a channel per speaker. The deliverable you send out, if it's a 5.1, there's 6 channels, one for each of your full range speakers and an LFE. That is not how immersive works. It is what's called object-based mixing. So the number of things in that file has nothing to do with the number of speakers that are here. And what's happening is in 5.1, you could pan between speakers, right? That was the limit of what you can do. In immersive, you can pan between speakers and in 3 dimensions, up, down, and into the center of the space. So that obviously opens up a whole bunch of new possibilities. It also dramatically changes this for whatever reason. I don't have an answer to this, but it's the thing that lit the two of us up the first time we heard it.
mm,
And we went, okay, whatever is happening here, this isn't what we heard before.
Yeah.
So I don't know, does that make some measure of sense to you?
Yeah,
The-
but I've seen like for example, here I see 3, 4.
Okay.
8, 10 speakers or something.
So
They're each fed separately, right? And how's the signal get from what you mix to those speakers?
so we mix in Pro Tools.
Right?
Pro Tools is then feeding. I'm gonna make this really simple. So those who know more about this will know that I'm just
Make it down.
making
Dumb it down.
the basic signal flow. Instead of your DAW feeding your speakers directly, your DAW is feeding a piece of software called the Dolby Renderer.
Oh, right. Okay,
The Dolby Renderer is crunching a bunch of numbers to say, if I put something in that speaker, well, how much do the rest of the speakers need to do anything? No. If I want to put that thing here in the room, how much of it needs to come out of each of these speakers? And it's doing that for as many things as you've assigned.
with
An
delay and
object to.
all and everything, so that it
So
images
the-
properly.
Yes,
And so the
what's it
operative
called again?
it's
renderer.
called, yeah, the Dolby
Okay.
Renderer.
The operative concept here is that no matter where I take that mix, that thing that I put over there, no matter
Stays
how many
there.
speakers I've got, no matter anything else, it's going to be there.
So the whole.
Even if I'm listening to it in earbuds,
Yeah.
it's going to be there because I placed it there and the renderer is going to replicate it there.
You with the hat?
Yes, I can add a little more clarity.
Yes.
for you. So the Atmos renderer doesn't see channels except for the
Yes.
beds.
Yeah, it's these
It sees a
locations.
dome
Mm.
of sound in the room with X, Y, and Z coordinates, which is why when you place things in space inside the dome, it scales to whatever system you play it on because it's just looking at
At
X,
the
Y, Z
dome.
coordinates.
Yeah,
So if you have
yeah.
2 speakers, those are your X, Y, and Z coordinates. If you have 50 speakers in a theater, now you've got, a lot more definition of that space.
So you can,
So it's scalable to anything.
in a lot of ways, you can think about it the way you think about pixels in a photograph, right? If you take a really high resolution photograph, you can make it smaller and you can make it bigger. It's just the resolution of the photo that changes,
So
right?
tell me how it gets from that to your.
So, the renderer does a fold down,
Binaural.
a binaural fold down
Uh-huh.
that includes a bunch of psychoacoustic stuff to create a 3-dimensional.
And that's embedded
Image.
somehow in the, whatever the.
In the
material,
renderer,
In the
yeah.
content that you
The-
give to the
the
streaming.
Deliverable file is called an ADM file. The and you can assign up to, for each one of your mixes, you can assign up to 128 separate objects. Right, so I can have 128 different things in 128 different places if I want to. You can also mix two things together if they're going to be in the same spot. That's, it's not, well, you get well beyond 128 in post. It's more rare for us to get up that high.
I hope so.
But
Yikes.
all of the deliverable file contains all the necessary audio. But what's different about it is it also contains metadata that's got all the panning information, all the proper gain information, all the placement information, and it also contains instructions on how we want all this stuff. If you want to play back our Atmos mix on your 5.1 system,
Oh, yeah.
how does it fold down everything? What kind of trims did we put into it? How does it fold down to binaural? How does it fold down to 7.1? So that depending on what system you play it back on, as Charles was saying, you're getting the thing that we intended you to get for that
To be really
system.
picky though, if you only have 116 objects, you have to have one bed. It won't let you not have a bed.
It won't let you not have
okay.
a bed, but the bed is essentially 10 objects. Yeah.
Another question.
It's a
Yeah.
different, it's
Well,
a
I was
different
gonna
thing
add to that,
usage
just
wise.
say Basically, every device that can play back has its own renderer for its specific
Yes.
application. So if it's a home theater receiver, it's rendering just for what the home theater receiver can output. If it's a sound bar, it's rendering for
Yes.
the sound bar.
Mhm.
It's
I mean, I've
placeholder's part.
yeah, I've listened to binaural stuff where, I mean, there was a binaural demo that they played at an AES show last year or the year before that they were shaking a box of paper clips over your head, and you literally thought that it was moving there, and
Yeah, and
it's
the binaural thing's really interesting because it works incredibly well with momentary sounds like that.
that makes sense, sure,
At least for me,
as opposed to
I've
droning kind of
something
yeah.
like music that goes on longer over time. It's like your brain is trying to slowly unwind what tricks are being played on it. No, there can't be something coming from there because and it's weird for me. And I've heard some really good, like Sony actually has a fantastic binaural thing to the point where they had me sitting in an array of speakers with headphones on, and they played a voice saying, left speaker, center speaker, right speaker, and it went all the way around me. And then they said, okay, we're going to do it one more time. And the second time it was in the headphones, and I stopped them and said, I think this is still coming out of the speakers. And they said, no, it's not. And then they played some music for me. And at first I was like, oh my God. And then by a minute in, I was like, no, it's kind of the same as all the other stuff I've heard. Which I just think is a function of our brains constantly trying to solve problems.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Any other questions?
Yeah, two different questions.
Yeah.
First one is you said something about that the Dolby seems to have more fidelity. And is there a technical, is it because you're working in 24 bits or 96K or, these have been available for a while. So what is it when you say that you're hearing more stuff? Do you have any idea why?
Yeah.
It's possible.
We're just, first of all, we're allowed more dynamic range, which is a huge deal, and also just more frequency
more
response.
space.
We have more space, more speakers, everything. So basically, we're not jamming stuff into a small bucket. If you have like 50 gallons of music and you put it into a 20-gallon bucket, it's all kind of jammed in there. Now we can open it all up. It just breathes. I don't know how to
Stuff
say
that
it.
we all do in stereo mixing, we all spend a lot of time going, okay, well, I'm going to turn this part up here, but now it's kind of a mess. So I got to turn something else down. It's a zero-sum game,
Yeah,
right? You
yeah.
get it to a certain point and something's got to give.
Because you can
So-
spread it around, you can focus your
Between
attention on different things at different times.
and stuff that got buried in I think Epic's a fantastic example of that because there's so much like, Matt and Jim Martin did this amazing
Orchestrated guitar stuff, yeah.
guitar stuff that can you hear it in the stereo? It's there, but you really got to lean in to find it.
Mhm.
And in the Atmos, it all kind of could stand out
Yeah.
more equally. And like Matt was saying, that Rob Gross from Rhino, listen, he's like, I've never heard these parts before because Matt did what he had to do in the stereo mix, which is this is the most important thing.
Yeah.
This has to be a little less important here.
Yeah.
So
There's
that's
no
the,
masking.
Yeah,
Masking,
masking,
there's
yeah.
no
Well,
frequency
Uh-huh.
rationale.
Is it
Yeah.
also because of the localization, because you can
Yeah,
say.
yeah,
that
your
helps.
Yeah,
brain-
exactly. Your brain can pick it out more
Absolutely.
easily.
You're talking
Yeah.
over there and he's talking over there, so you could both talk at the same time, and I could hear both of you.
Yeah.
But if you
absolutely.
were both talking from there, I wouldn't understand what you were saying.
You had a question as well?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
We'll get to him that we're, I mean, go ahead.
Look, well, yeah, my question was actually about people are, the other half, the other part of this question, it's not the same question. With business kids, so you said, obviously, you're not making as much money as you can, but yet you're getting paid to do this.
Yeah.
There's a business case. What is the nature of the business case right now that you're saying, we need to take something from the eighties and we need to remaster it because we think we can sell it where?
Oh, it's a streaming based format,
Mhm.
but Apple's paying more money per stream for every stream, stereo or Atmos, for a song that has an Atmos mix.
They're trying to create a market.
Yes.
Yeah,
And have
I mean,
created one.
that's it, you know, the thing here also is there's a lot of immersive standards out there right now. And I dare say that what they're doing is they're flooding the market with product so that then they can become the de facto standard because there's more software available.
Yeah.
They also, like, build their own earbuds that
Yeah.
can now play Atmos,
Yeah.
so now
They're selling
everyone sends
hardware.
this to you,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you're stuck, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah,
Oh,
they own the whole ecosystem.
stuff up their shitty speakers on their phone now you can hear it well, so it's just
So
marketing.
to write up
Yeah.
your question, who's your client then? Is your client like the record company?
Record labels mainly, sometimes the band or slash the artists.
Yeah, it runs a gamut, same as with stereo.
But it's not Apple Music.
No,
No.
no, Apple is not funding this
Yeah. And my prediction,
anymore.
my prediction,
Yeah.
honestly, I think 5 to 7 years from now, I think stereo is gonna be a relic of the past, because I just don't think that it can compete at all with Atmos. Once you hear Atmos, I just don't think it's anywhere close. I think it's just gonna, I really think stereo is gonna be like mono.
Okay,
That's
I'm gonna pull this up in 5 to 7 years and see how it ages, okay?
Listen, I will tell you what, I'll put $1,000 on it right now. 6 years from now, it's
6
gonna
years
be-
from now, $1,000 is gonna be worth about 5, but okay.
Okay, but you had a question.
Mark had a question, yeah.
This is mixer based or system based. But you had talked earlier about placement.
Mhm.
And like, you put something above, and I don't notice it until I click on it. And so I'm thinking in terms of like, THX, when they had surrounds, they incorporated like an X curve. So that the surrounds didn't call
Right.
too much attention to themselves. These all seem like full range speakers.
They are.
Mhm.
So so maybe it's a mixer question, is that when you're placing things in different places, are you thinking in terms of using filters or something so that it sits better, or is it just project based?
I think it's both. There's no rule as far as like the THX thing is what 40-year-old technology
Easily,
now.
yeah.
I think we've learned a lot of stuff, and I think that Atmos works in a much more advanced way. So I treat it the same way I would treat anything else, which is I listen to it on the speakers, I listen to it on the headphones, because most of our audience is going to hear it on headphones, and I say, does it sound good? And if it does, and I like it, then I leave it alone. If it doesn't, then I make an adjustment, the same as I would for anything else. The only thing that I will say I do pay attention to is the frequency content of stuff that we pan either to the back or to the top because of how the headphones will react. Part of the trickery of making you think that something coming from here is coming from here or behind you or in front of you is that to match what our ears do, things get darker in the headphones as you pan them towards the rear, and they get brighter as you pan up. So you want to be really careful about, like, if you pan a tambourine to the top speakers in the headphones, it's going to be screaming because it just it tends to focus those frequencies. If you take something that's got a lot of high frequency content and put it in the rear speakers, it might sound really cool in the room, but you put the headphones on and it will sound really dull because it's trying to create that same feeling. But I have to say that honestly, as much as I recognize the trickery that's happening in the headphones, there's a reason why it's happening. And when I take the headphones off and really consider what I'm hearing in the room, I realize often that I'm not evaluating the thing I just panned to the back based on the merits of having it panned back there. I'm evaluating it based on how it sounded when it was in front of me. And now I thought it would be cool to put it in the back. And I haven't gone, okay, but does it really sound good back there? Or am I just going, no, it'd be cool if it were there.
So do you find yourself bouncing back and forth between the immersive in the room mix versus the binaural mix?
Yeah,
constantly.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, like Will says, 90% of our listeners are going to be listening in binaural.
It's
for now.
Yeah.
For now.
Where I feel like mixing in stereo, we all spend so much time saying the speakers are all that really matters and the headphones will be the headphones. That's not the case now. It's like half and half. I bet we spend half our time on headphones.
And I think because the headphones are really the entree into Atmos for this time being. I think in the future it's gonna be everywhere. It's gonna be ubiquitous, and it will be more people are gonna hear it on speakers, sound bars, whatever it is, cars. I think cars. I'm telling you, cars. That's it.
Well, I mean, in general, once it is to the point where we can recreate this binaurally in an open space, I think that's going to be, that's going to be a tipping point.
It won't be binaural in open space. It's going to be.
Well, what I'm saying is, one of the arguments at this point is I don't want to buy 5 speakers or 7 speakers or whatever. But if it can be replicated to the point where it can be replicated on a sound bar or in a binaural, like 2 speakers kind of environment.
It can now.
It can. He's got a Sonos, so you get a sound bar with a couple of satellites. You can replicate it really, really well.
Even just the sound bar, again, this comes back to, does it ever sound the way it's going to sound in here? No, it doesn't sound like that. Does it sound pretty friggin' cool? Yeah,
because they have upward firing, speakers, everything kind of. So it's.
But like when we talk about the, Charles and I were talking the other day about the VME stuff. Where I can take my mix room with me.
Right.
That whole concept. What we're going for there is a certain consistency that is replicable to that point where I can literally say, okay, I want to hear it like I heard it in Capitol Studio B or whatever, are you to that point where you can actually do that?
No, but I don't think anybody is. I don't think any format is ever going to be to that point because no 2 environments are the same. Unless somebody is willing to do to a room in their house what we have done here. If somebody was willing, and it's the same thing with hi-fi folks now. Those people are willing to spend an inordinate amount of money on a space where they sit down and have an expensive glass of wine and listen to $100,000 worth of stereo equipment.
Right.
So maybe that sounds, first of all, it doesn't sound like it sounded in the studio, but it sounds pleasing to them. But look at that investment. Everybody else is listening on an Amazon Echo Dot or a JBL Jambox.
Well, and that's what I have to laugh about because, 90% of your listeners, they're going to pull up a tune on a phone and they're going to throw the phone on the counter and, that's the listening experience.
But if they're an earbud.
Then why aren't we mixing them mono?
Well, and that's the question is, are we ever going to reach that?
But if they're listening to earbuds, they're going to hear the binaural fold down anyway.
Yeah.
So Apple automatically plays back the Atmos mix if it's available.
So
you're listening to Atmos whether you like it or not. It's already happening.
Well, no, okay, so that now brings
feel good.
Yeah. Now but that brings up a whole other can of worms there, Matt.
Yes.
Because that is one of the things, and I know we have had this conversation in the past, but there's a lot of griping about, well, I want my classic stereo mix of this. I don't want to hear the Atmos mix.
It's still there.
It's still there. Turn the switch. Easy peasy. Look, there's no loss. All it is another opportunity to hear it in a different way. If you don't like that way, click it over. There you got stereo. You can go back to crappy old stereo.
Yeah,
that's
I listen to stereo when I listen through my earbuds.
Earbuds.
So you're definitely stereo, or is there Atmos? Do you know?
It's switchable and I
Yeah,
turn
yeah.
off the app.
Okay.
Mhm.
It drives me nuts. I
Okay.
love Atmos.
Do you have the head tracking on or not?
I turned it off.
Okay, good, good.
Yeah, the head tracking drives me
yeah.
absolutely batshit. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
there-
Yeah.
To be
There's
accurate,
something about that does not sound even remotely natural to me.
Yeah.
Okay, when I'm in a room and I hear it, I'm impressed to hell. But when I listen, and I do a lot of walking.
And that's,
and it's
I think
actually-
that the thing is, that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
There's just, this is a new thing on top of an old thing. We're not, nobody's deleting the stereo
It's- yeah.
mixes.
Yeah. You had a
So
question?
Just to be a bit of a stickler, if you're listening on the iPhone, you're not listening to Atmos, you're listening to the Apple encoder.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
based on,
That's a lot.
But
in the same breath, if you're listening to Tidal, you're listening to the Dolby encoder. That's the only.
Fair
difference.
point.
It's both, they're both based on our ADM file.
Right, but they do sound different. I mean,
Yeah,
it's sort of-
absolutely.
the Apple
yeah.
encoder sounds different from the Dolby.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, they're getting
Yeah.
closer, but yes, you're correct.
Going back to the idea of not being able to tolerate the Atmos in the earbuds, there is a small percentage of the population whose brains don't respond
Yes.
to sound the same way, and binaural mixes don't work.
Or don't
Yep.
work.
Really?
Yeah.
You had a question? Yeah.
Have you guys looked into the specs yet of the new Apple codecs that they announced the other day?
Wait a
Wait,
second. Wait, they announced what?
Your last update on your iPhone just changed everything.
I'm gonna put the brakes on this here and just say this. Matt and I have both signed multiple NDAs with Apple, so if they're doing anything, yes, we know about it.
Okay.
And whatever that codec is not what you think it is.
Yeah.
Oh,
Apple
Okay.
doesn't announce anything about
They,
this.
they just
publicly.
do it. That's the thing. They do it
Never.
without telling
They
you.
published developer specs though of explaining channel counts and stuff, and it's more of a container for the original ADMs, but also their new positioning algorithms.
And it
But they haven't put out tons more information yet.
How are you getting this stuff?
It's on
are you on ADC or something?
Oh,
Or
okay.
it's
Okay.
for software developers.
okay, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I used to get all that stuff with
It's
ADC.
their new droplet apps and tools to actually encode it,
Mhm.
but they've given bits of information on what it's doing, but not a ton yet.
And they all, you know what else they haven't said? What does that apply to?
Yeah, well, that's part of the
Music?
yeah.
Film. By the way, spatial audio for film, not the same as for music. Spatial audio for games, not
Uh-huh.
the same as for music or film.
Well, in their last, because they, in the developer conference, they had a section of the video presentation where they talked about it. It's replacing all of Apple Spatial's original codecs on every Apple device with the new OS.
Oh, that's nice of them.
Yeah, could be
Okay.
good.
But it's, all I can say is there's nothing in the works to change the way spatial audio for
Yeah.
music sounds.
It's just,
Yeah.
I think it's more objects are gonna be allowed, something like, from what I've gathered.
But even the, I mean, when you send a file to Apple, they don't look at the objects anyway. They look at.
Yes, they do.
Do they?
Yeah. They sum
They
down to, what,
create-
15?
They create a 7.1.4 fold down based on the ADM file with the spatialization included. What is spit out is not the ADM file with all of the
Yeah.
object audio included, but it absolutely is accounting for where those objects are
Yeah.
placed. in
So
three-dimensional
just for
space.
the record, Will and I, Will in particular, we have been talking to Apple about stuff for almost 4 years. Sometimes giving them some praise, but oftentimes just being really frustrated. But so we have a very, very direct contact with them and the people at Dolby, obviously. So we're really tied in because we want to know so we can operate and do our very, very best mixes. We need to talk to the people who actually built this stuff and go, hey, what's happening here? Why is this sounding different over here? And they'll explain, well, here's what you have to do. We've changed the way we mix multiple times, multiple times because of the way things are being played back. Will, this is no hyperbole at all. Will's probably in the top 3 people in this field who knows this stuff inside and out. He's read every single manual and talked to everybody who built stuff. His fingerprints are on the renderer
Okay.
and the assembler.
I'm gonna cry.
No, but seriously, thank goodness, because I have no capacity for that. I have 0 patience. I have no knowledge about stuff. I mix with my elbows. I'm boneheaded as can be, but I will say Will, when we started, there were guys who were the godfathers. Will's up there now because he is so driven to learn this stuff. He's so dedicated and he has such patience and desire to learn and go, check this out. Look at this little thing we learned. It's like, oh my God. So we're in it. We're in it. And him in particular, he's in it deep. Dolby flew him to Detroit 2 years ago to talk to the auto manufacturers about Atmos in cars. I mean, that should tell you something. So anyway, go on.
I have to actually interrupt for a second. Daniel, your computer's about to die. We have 7% here, and we have some questions from the people watching.
Oh, let's do some online.
Then let's do some online
questions.
questions. I do have a power cable. I can get a power cable.
Power cable.
While you ask the questions, yes.
So we have a question from.
We have a yeah, audio guy with a mic. Hey, that's right. Yeah. So we have a question from Patrick Brinan. I hope I'm not massacring your name. Besides Capital, have you tested your mixes in an Atmos equipped dubbing stage to see how they translate? No, but we played them back in Dolby's theater on Vine Street multiple times. We played them back in consumer movie theaters like AMC theaters. Dubbing stage doesn't matter for us because that's not where our mixes are going. It's the gold standard for post for sure, because the whole idea of that dub stage is to allow the mixers to do something that is going to translate in theaters. Our final destination is not theaters. So while I certainly, we have an event in a theater, we will go ahead of time and listen. And on a couple of occasions, I think we tweaked mixes so that the people who come to the event have a good experience. That's not the be all and end all for us.
Okay.
If anybody else watching online has questions, type them into the comment section.
Okay. Yes.
One more question. You guys talked a little bit about, the treatment of this room.
Yes.
Could you talk about it a little? Because I've been here for about an hour and it's a pretty nice sounding room,
It is, huh?
And I think there's more to it than just these cool tapestries that are.
Yeah, I think we will have some playback in here.
We'll have some playback.
But this is a great sound.
I'll try to condense it really quickly. Years ago, I did study some physics and I did study some room design to a very small amount. And my buddy Jeff and I did the build out here, and I had designed this room. I knew that it didn't want to have parallel walls. I knew that was really essential back in the stereo era. And then subsequent to that, Will and I decided to build an Atmos. And the thing that's really unique about our room is that there's no coupling of the speakers to the actual room itself, none of the walls. Other studios have to wrestle with that, and that does change the playback. But we had this design, we put it together this way. This is probably one of very, very, very few Atmos rooms with a listening position. You are equidistant to every single speaker. Most other studios have to kind of push things back and move it back and use a lot of delay to compensate. But this room, when Dolby tuned it, they're like, oh my God, you guys like within like half a millisecond of the different speakers, because we measured with lasers. I mean, both of us are pretty anal about that. Will in particular.
Yeah, we won't talk about how that triggered my obsessive compulsive.
But we basically had a listening position. We had a laser pointer. We did all the speakers. So this room is, actually people from Capitol would come here and listen in this room and go, man, your guys' room sounds great. The low end sounds great, et cetera, et cetera. So part of it was a lot of diligence, but also we were somewhat lucky too.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Quickly.
Yes.
So I work in the room acoustics and design portion of the audio industry, and we're used to see contour rooms of a classic shape driven by the stereo, big speakers, soffit mounted, big diffuser broadband in the back.
Yes.
How would you say the Dolby Atmos technology will drive the design of contour rooms and mixed rooms in the future? And is there a point where that will bridge with tracking rooms so that you're tracking in Dolby?
So I'm going to answer the first part of that.
Yes.
I've worked on designing a couple of Atmos rooms, not from an acoustic perspective, but from the equipment and setup perspective, and then worked with room tuners on those rooms. And I've had a number of discussions about rooms that have been retrofitted from stereo with diffusers or traps in the back of the room. And they can get actually kind of problematic for Atmos because obviously now you've got one end of the room that's reflective and one end that's soaking up everything, which means that and with this system you want equal energy coming from everywhere. So there's a lot of extra tuning that often has to be done in order to compensate for that. So but what's interesting is like how much do you want to balance? Because this is why Matt's and my partnership works so well. I don't think stereo is going away. I just think it will become less important as immersive becomes more important over time. And I do think the question is how much can we compromise on those two things, and how much ultimately does it matter to, in a world where we have virtual mix environments that are getting better and better, how much does it matter? So that's that part.
Well, so the second part is recording in Atmos. Something that Will and I were really interested in doing probably a couple of years ago was to actually track in Atmos, and we were really
while monitoring
Atmos, and we were really excited about that. We kept trying to have all these different ideas of ways to do it. Will did some big band stuff that sounds incredible. He did it East West, where he used a mic tree to basically capture the room sound, the horns, the drums. But recently, 3 months ago, in January, we actually did a recording with an Atmos tree, mic tree, and we monitored live in the control room. We actually had an entire Atmos room setup. And I'll tell you, here's the thing, Atmos, it's actually not really effective at all for pop music at all, because we don't hear things that way. Everything's recorded multiple mono.
You can read all about this in the June issue.
In the June issue of Recording Magazine.
No, I wrote
at your newsstand today
about this session. It's online. You can check.
But so when you think about it, most popular music is recorded multiple mono. You do the bass, you do the vocal, you do everything's multiple mono. And so to record, we recorded this quartet. Was it a quintet or a quartet? Quartet.
4 people.
And so we had this mic tree, and we literally used the center mic was for the vocalist and his guitar, and we had a cellist. It was live. And to record in Atmos and monitor in Atmos, thanks to the people at Cali, beautiful people. They brought in this entire setup.
Yeah, they did a whole 714 setup for us.
And Will and I both have never worked so hard in our lives. That was a 13-hour day
for 2 of us, so a 26-hour day
for setting it up, getting it rolling, recording the band, and then people from NAMM showed up. We had like 20 people in the control room listening, explaining to them what we're doing, and trying to get performances out of the band. It was a very heavy lift.
Wow.
But I will say it can work with a small group like that. You can do it. But we both said, oh my God, just put them in a semicircle. Let's get regular microphones put in there. It'll sound great.
Yeah, we were doing this at the behest of a cool company called Immersive Design Labs. They have an 11 microphone, 7
like an ambisonic kind of thing.
Not ambisonic. It's an Atmos array.
Oh, interesting.
7 microphones to match that. I mean, excluding these 2 wide speakers to match the speaker placements, and then 4 upward facing mics. And Matt and I never ones to say, okay, let's do this, and then let's try and make sure we do it in the most simple way possible. We went the other way and went, well, we really want to show off this array. So how about we, instead of using close microphones, we try and just use the array, which is the equivalent of setting up a pair of stereo microphones and saying, let's record a quartet with stereo microphones, but we want to have the same sound as if we close mic'd everything, which is just difficult.
So this is not the same one that we use for.
This is one that we made.
Yeah, we made this, and Will use it for his big band thing. So imagine this right here. The microphone is for the center speaker, and you got these 2 left and right. You got these
sides.
Sides are here, rears are there, and these guys are up. So these are the 4 ups. The 4
mics.
So this is all based on a bunch of work that Hyungkook Lee, who teaches at the University of Sheffield, and Morten Lindberg have done, we actually got the layout for this because we built this, or Matt built this really. We got the layout for this and the basic idea of how to set up the polar patterns on each microphone from Hyung Cook and through Andrew Sheps. And we did what Hyung Cook had laid out because it is what will give you, or what he posits will give you, the least amount of phase issues between mic positions. That said, having done this and having done the Immersive Design Labs recording, which was this was a combination of, I think the three fronts were omni, the upward facing mics were all hypercardioid, sides were hypercardioid, rears were cardioid. Wow. Immersive Design Labs, everything was omni.
Yes.
Having done that, I think in both cases, from a perspective of what I'd like to hear coming back out of the speakers, I would have done cardioid and hypercardioid here.
The Omni thing really was difficult. It wasn't that, it just got we got the bleed of everything and all the other microphones. It wasn't the directionality we would have liked to have had.
Did you do any phasing with all that close together?
No, and I think that's probably because of the setup, because we had 4 people set up very close to microphones that would normally be sort of room microphones.
My next question, if you've got that and it looks like it just lays flat on the ground.
No, it goes on 4 mic stands.
Yeah.
There's a mic stand at each corner and you can hoist it.
Okay.
Okay, and so then where are people placed around that?
For the Immersive Design Labs thing, we were trying to get a close mic sounding recording around what should have been a room array. Yeah. So everyone was very close.
Right up on the mics.
Right up on the mics. For the big band recording, that was just in the center of the room, actually hanging right beneath or lifted up right beneath where I had a Deca tree for the stereo room capture.
Yeah, when you get a chance, you have to hear what Will did, especially like the first version of the stuff he did. The one, the Samsung stuff was good, but Will did this thing. If you sit in here, you can hear the horns. So everyone around you. It's some of the most beautiful recording I've ever heard. It's so gorgeous, but it's really natural. You just sit, you go, oh my God, I'm in the room. I'm in the room. You know what I mean? So. Which I know for you,
background vocals weren't behind you.
No background vocals, but for you should listen to it because you can hear the horns around you. And I know it's not front centric, but it feels like you're sitting in a chair listening to the band. You're like
sitting. It's like you're sitting in the middle of East West Studio One, listening to the band play.
You will be hard pressed to find more beautiful audio than that. Wow. For me, it's stunning. It's stunning.
You have another online question.
Yes.
Hit us.
Go ahead. Microphone.
I can just project.
No, you can't.
Wow. What is the prediction about the near future spatial audio landscape with other players like Sony 360, Samsung, Google, etc.? Could they make a dent into the current Dolby Atmos dominance?
I'll start and then Will can finish it. Do you guys remember Betamax?
Yeah,
that's what it's all about. It's who's got the marketing, right?
Honestly, the Sony 360 thing, which isn't actually the 360 thing, is actually 360 RA, and I think they've changed the name of it now too. Yeah, all I can say is when we do work for Sony Records, we're not being asked to create those mixes. So that's, I mean, that kind of tells you something about where that's headed. The Samsung thing, I have questions about, and I did a recording for Samsung.
That's the earcam format, isn't it? Because I think, because Harman Samsung bought Flux, and Flux was using the earcam, the French.
But it's all developed in partnership with Google, so it's not exactly that thing anymore. It's departed fairly. In a fairly significant.
What's that old saying about the nice thing about standards is that there are so many of them?
But they announced that what do they call it? Eclipse in January. YouTube was supposed to be doing it by now. It's still not doing it. Now they're saying it's going to be 2026. And then yesterday I saw that Google just announced that their new run of Chromebooks is going to have Atmos.
Oh,
So
That's
now I don't know
interesting.
what's happening.
And look, here's the thing, we
Wow.
already have Atmos coming in cars, so what are these other, what are they gonna do? Are they gonna just try to jam like the Sony thing in there, or, I mean, what are they gonna do?
well, and that comes back. I mean, your Betamax thing is the perfect example. It's who's to market first, who has the
Yeah.
most marketing dollars.
Not necessarily the best one.
Yeah,
No.
exactly.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's a future.
I'm back,
Hmm?
I think Barco is sort of making a leap to the way again.
Really?
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's an open. I mean, the Google and Samsung thing to me was like, I'm going to keep an eye on this because you jump in with YouTube, and YouTube for music, people don't consider this. YouTube is the biggest music streaming service on
It
the
is.
planet
Yes,
by
it
a
is.
lot.
Yes, it is.
50
Bigger than Spotify.
Percent
Yes.
of all music streamed online is streamed on YouTube.
Yep.
Think about it. YouTube is the second biggest search engine, right after Google. Why do you think Google bought it? Yeah,
If you need to send,
yeah.
if you need to send a song to a friend that you want them to be able to listen to, you
Yeah.
don't know if they have Spotify, you don't know if they have Apple Music. What do you send them? You send them a YouTube link.
Mhm.
And that's what everybody does. And so that drives
That's
huge
Yeah.
music numbers.
Makes sense.
And so that made me think, oh, okay, this is something we need to make sure, like if we need to be able to deliver in this format, how do I do it? But it's been a fractured rollout.
Mhm.
So and when I saw how the deliverable had to be made and all sorts of, I was like, we're a little ways away from having to be concerned about this. So, and now the announcement that came out yesterday, I'm like, this is weird. Why, if they've had this partnership, would they put out a product that is using a competing format?
Mhm.
Yeah. Question?
Yeah, the question was file size. I mean, if you got 128 objects and say in stereo, you've got essentially 2 objects, what's the actual ratio?
Well, it's 1 gig, 1 to 1.5 gig.
So
size.
yeah, essentially it works in a lot of metadata is relatively tiny. Obviously, the more panning moves you put in, the more metadata you're going to build up. But the big number comes from how many objects did you use and how long is the song. The deliverables right now for any streaming service, the audio that's enclosed in the ADM wrapper is 48K 24-bit. So you can figure it out from there. But the average for us, again, it depends on, like, if it's an acoustic guitar and vocal, well, that's going to be fairly small. But for like a 3-minute song, it's definitely around the 1 gigabyte or north space.
If you want to
Which,
see how much information is in an ADM, open it up in a Pro Tools session.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Every
Yes.
move is another track.
yep.
So
Sure.
it is
Yeah.
pretty linear, right? I mean, it's just, you're not saying, they're not using compression of some kind to,
How it's delivered on streaming
well, okay,
is another thing.
That was the other question.
But
yeah.
the file that we're delivering is not compressed in
Yeah.
any way.
But in streaming, they're doing something. I mean, they're
must be.
assessing, they're probably
Absolutely.
sending what they need to for your particular.
Yeah,
sound.
Apple is essentially delivering a 12-channel MP4 file. So that could be 20 some gigs. Or gigs, megabytes. It's small. So yeah, are you getting the full picture? No, same as you're not getting it in stereo. Even, well, technically lossless, but lossless isn't actually lossless, so.
I want to go back to something that this gentleman brought up earlier
Yes.
about room design.
Yes.
In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think you work with Walter Sturrock, correct?
No,
Okay. And I've had this conversation with John Sturrock because he has pointed out that one of the things that John mentioned that I thought was kind of amusing was he said, years ago when they would award, best song Grammy, you'd have one person walking up. Now you've got 12, 13, 14 people working on a project. So there has to be a certain amount of consistency
Yes.
between all of those rooms. does this now make it easier to achieve that consistency? How
Hell
does it take I mean, how much of the room design does it take out of the equation?
I mean, the room design is never coming fully out of the equation.
Mhm.
You're in a space and that space is going to affect the sound.
Sure,
Because there are
sure.
going to be reflections.
But are you trying to avoid that now? Are you trying to minimize that?
For me, I think it's a lot more simplified. Once you get into kind of softening speakers and building bass drops, it gets kind of complicated.
No more rock walls?
And the thing is, because you have everything's kind of at the front, kind of facing one way, you have to kind of address it a certain way. Here, you got everything around you. You also need the amount of volume.
Yeah.
Which means the room doesn't get activated because you're only cranking up so that each speaker is kind of barely working.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Yeah,
if you-
15 speakers aimed at your head. You
Yeah,
you
they don't have
don't
to be
turn
very
it, you have
loud.
to turn up nearly as loud.
Yeah, I mean, so when you really think about the interaction with the room, I do think is much more reduced.
Yeah.
And again, there's no contact with the room. These things are on pads, nothing's reverberating or kind of, coupled. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think a good room is always like a well-designed room acoustically is always going to be better than a poorly designed room.
Mhm.
I think that I always felt when I was working in stereo that the idea of trying to overcome faults in either your playback system or your space by tuning your speakers was cheating. And so when it became clear that there was no way that we were going to aim 15 speakers sort of at one another and expect that that was going to make sense without room tuning, I just had to kind of go, all right, well, I have to let go of my preconceptions about this. And I listened to the array before it was tuned and after it was tuned. And I walked up to Brian Pennington, who tuned the room, and went, yeah, okay, that's way, way better than it was before. So I think that and the people who tune rooms will tell you the less they have to do to overcome the problems in your space, the better it's going to sound.
Which makes perfect sense, of course. Yeah. Mhm.
So
Yeah.
you're not going to be out of a job anytime soon.
Speaking of speakers, is there a subwoofer channel?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and is that localized to the front or the back or anything? Or
We've got 2 subwoofers in our system here because that was what was recommended to us. We ultimately settled on having 2 separate channels. One handles the LFE channel, which, if you're not aware, in any surround system up through Atmos, LFE is low frequency effects. That is its own dedicated channel for, like, if Charles wants to rattle the seats in the movie theater when the
Explosions.
that's what
All
the
right.
LFE is for. It is not a base management, like what. Yeah, it's exactly. It's not extending low frequencies. We do have a second subwoofer that is doing that for bass management.
Yes.
What are you guys using for room tuning? I'm just curious.
What are we using for what?
What are you tuning the room with?
Antelope.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a Galaxy 32 that handles all of our monitoring and B chain EQ and delay and all that stuff.
Yeah, we like it too.
Yeah, we're really happy with it.
Antelope is good.
Any other questions? You gotta be some questions around here somewhere. Yeah,
I got plenty of questions if you got time.
we go in here, yes.
Well, we want to make sure people
Oh,
can
yeah, we
listen to
want to
stuff. We
also
got a
give you
car
some time
outside.
for
Hang on a second.
demos and stuff.
Yeah.
But
You're talking about using distortion instead of compression and trying to recreate what's happening on the mix bus. How is it like, in the sense that you're reducing that threshold that we had before, and like it being that you can only hit like negative 18 lufs, and like how do you battle that, if that makes any sense? Don't ever word it properly.
Doesn't
It's not hard.
Yeah, it doesn't really.
You just turn it down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, and you probably.
I know it sounds really
Yeah.
simple, but ultimately we'll match the sound when we're happy with the way things sound one versus the other. And what we're not worried about is, like, if we get a really hammered stereo master that, the verse is really quiet, but it's not actually quiet because it's so limited that it's just as loud as the chorus is. We're not trying to match that dynamic.
Right.
Yeah.
And then turn it down. We're letting the song breathe the way it would breathe before, trying to add in some of whatever personality the compression and limiting might be adding. The thing is that personality is less often actually compression
distortion.
And more often distortion and or brick wall limiting.
Exactly, yeah, I guess that's like, as we're driving the distortion more to get that energy and that feel.
Yeah.
We're getting closer and closer to that -18, so we gotta bring it down.
Yep.
So then the discrepancies of your true peak that you have to hit, that's not as important. If you, let's say you're doing an album like from song to song, like that's, I guess that like how much of it you're focusing on the actual peak point. But if
The peak point, as long as it meets the, and the thing is, the harder we have to drive something or compress or limit something, like the more compressed a mix is, the further away the true peak is going to get.
Right.
Like that won't come anywhere near the limit we have to follow once we get it up to the -18 integrated. It's the dynamic stuff like jazz. Oh my God.
Yeah, like one hit, we'll just be like, man.
The big band stuff, Steve Genowick and I've had this conversation, and a few other folks that we know, where I'm just like, it's brutal, because if I don't want the sound of a limiter across the whole mix, I have to go through by hand and keep hitting play. Up, it went over on that. That's a snare drum. I got to gain down this snare drum until we're under -1. Okay, hit play. Up, that trumpet hit. Gain that down. Yeah, it's brutal.
So the more dynamic range, the harder it gets.
The harder it
Yes,
gets.
yes.
Yeah, to hit these two numbers, the integrated level and the true peak level throughout the song. The more dynamic the material, the more difficult it is to get both those numbers to line up.
Yeah, we spent plenty of time playing it back, and -17.9. Dang it.
Yeah.
Okay, play it again. It's like it's tedious, but that's what you do. Questions before we get into playback?
Any more questions?
Last
Any
question.
more questions online? Okay.
Should we get a look at the car for the folks at home?
Yeah, let's do it.
Absolutely. Take them outside. We're gonna take you outside and show you the
people listen.
I mean, obviously, we're not gonna be able to send the immersive signal.
Right.